Welcome back to Past That Class. Today we're going to talk a little bit more about GDP, and I'm going to cover what is included in GDP and the GDP growth rate. Here we go. So first I want to talk about what is included in GDP. So for a good to be included, it must be legal. That's pretty straightforward. Only final goods are included. So a final good is just anything that is ready to be purchased in a store by the consumer. And it also must be produced domestically or within a nation's borders, like the United States. So if a good is not included in GDP, it gets a little bit more tricky. And I tried to make this as simple as possible, so let's see. Used goods are not included in GDP. So a used good is just anything that has been bought secondhand. So if I buy a truck that is 3 years old, that's not included in GDP. Purely financial transactions are not included in GDP. So if I just move money around in my bank accounts or I buy a share of stock, that's not included in GDP. Black market transactions are not included. So when you hear the word black market, I'm sure the first thing that comes to your mind is illegal. And that's true. Black market transactions do include illegal transactions. But they also include transactions that just aren't recorded. So, for instance, if a farmer only accepts cash for his vegetables, then that is not included in GDP. Because if he doesn't report his earnings, the government has no way of telling how much income he makes because it's not digital, it's just with cash. So that is included in black market and it's not included in GDP. Intermediate goods are not included. Intermediate goods are just anything that goes into the production of another good. So for instance, a t-shirt, the cotton that is used to make a t-shirt is an intermediate good because it goes into the production of making cotton. So the purchase of that cotton is not included in GDP. Companies that produce goods abroad, so for instance, if Ford had a factory in Japan, those cars would not be included in GDP. And also the sale of foreign goods in the United States or domestically. So for instance, a Swedish chocolate company that sells chocolate in the United States, those imports would not be included in our GDP. Transfer payments are not included. So transfer payments are when the government gives money to people without expecting anything in return. So transfer payments are not included in GDP. And finally, things that you do for yourself. So for instance, if you're a mechanic and you fix your own car, that is not included in GDP. So now I'm going to do a little quiz with you, and if you need more time you can pause the video, but I'm going to go right through this. So, first, a German beer company that sells beer to the US, is that included in GDP? No, because that German beer company produce those goods, not the United States, so those are imports not included in our GDP. The purchase of a share of IBM stock, so that's a purely financial transaction. It is not included in GDP. A plumber that only accepts payment in the form of cash and does not report his earnings. The government has no way of tracking that income, not included in GDP. That's a black market transaction. The sale of a computer that was produced in California. It's current, it's perfectly legal, produced in the United States. That is included in GDP. Sale of a computer produced in Ohio but sold in Japan. So this is a bit of a trick question because you see Japan and you instantly think foreign, so not included. But it was produced in Ohio and it's perfectly legal. So that actually is included in GDP. That's supposed to be a check mark, by the way. Cotton produced by a U.S. company to make t-shirts. So I think I already covered this. Cotton would be considered an intermediate good here. So that is not included in our GDP. The purchase of a 4-year-old Ford truck. I might have already covered this too. That would be a used good. So that is not included in GDP. And finally, if the government gives money to students in a scholarship program, that's just considered a transfer payment, and if you remember, that is not included in our GDP. So now we're going to move on to the GDP growth rate. And the GDP growth rate is just real GDP. Bear with me here. Real GDP in 1 year. Nope, that's a P. In 1 year minus real GDP in a prior year over real GDP in that same prior year. So that can be the real GDP from 2012 minus the real GDP from 2010 over the real GDP from 2010. But this year right here always has to be bigger than this year. And also all that is multiplied by 100. So now we're going to do a little practice with the GDP growth rate. I'm actually going to let you tackle this one, and you can pause the video. And by the way, that chart is all real GDP. So pause the video and try this one out. Alright, good. Let's see what you got. So the question is, what is the growth rate between 2013 and 2015? So you can ignore all the other numbers except for this one and this one, okay? So what you would do is bigger year minus small year over smaller year. So 16.47 trillion minus 15.76 trillion over 15.76 trillion, and then multiplied by 100, and that comes out to be, I think, 4.5%. So there you go. That's pretty straightforward. Hopefully you get that. Thanks for watching. This is Dylan Edelman with Pass That Class.